I've always been fascinated by abandoned places. Old hospitals, forgotten mines, decaying factories, anything with a history that people tried to bury. My best friend Emma was exactly the same. Every weekend, we'd drive somewhere remote just to see what we would find. That's how we found the bunker. It wasn't on any map. We weren't even looking for it. We had been hiking through a dense section of national forest that locals rarely visited. The trees were so thick that hardly any sunlight reached the ground, and the air smelled like wet leaves and pine needles. About 2 miles from the nearest trail, we stumbled across a massive concrete slab sticking out of the earth. At first, we thought it was an old storm shelter. Then we noticed the rusted steel hatch hidden. Beneath vines, it had been forced open many years ago. The hinges were frozen in place, leaving a narrow opening just wide enough for someone to squeeze through. Emma looked at me with a big grin. There's no way we're leaving without seeing what's down there. Looking back, that was the moment we should have turned around. We climbed down an old metal ladder into complete darkness. The air immediately changed. It was freezing, cold enough that I could see my own breath. The smell was even worse than anything I've ever experienced. Mold, old water, rust, and something faint underneath all of that. It reminded me of spoiled meat. Our flashlights swept across gray concrete walls. There were faded yellow arrows painted every few yards. Some pointed left, others pointed right. Most had been worn away so badly that they were impossible to follow. The first hallway stretched farther than our lights could reach. It was completely silent. Even our footsteps sounded strange, echoing through the tunnels like someone else was following just right behind us. The bunker was enormous. Every hallway branched into another. Some rooms were completely empty, except overturned filing cabinets. Others contained rows of ancient computer terminals covered in dust. Huge reel-to-reel tape machines that sat against walls beside broken monitors with cracked glass. One room looked like a communication center. Dozens of phones lined a desk. Every receiver was lying on the floor. The wires had been ripped out. "What even is this place?" Emma whispered. I shrugged. "It feels military." None of the equipment looked modern. Everything looked like it had been abandoned decades earlier. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. One hallway had children's drawings taped to the wall. Smiling stick figures, houses, dogs, rainbows, all yellowed with age. Then 50 feet farther, the walls were streaked with old brown stains. Not paint. The laboratory was the worst room. Metal operating tables stood beneath enormous surgical lights. Cabinets filled with shattered glass jars lined one wall. Most were empty. Some were contained with cloudy liquid, with something floating inside. Something too distorted to identify. Emma didn't joke anymore. Neither did I. Someone had smashed equipment all over the room, deep claw marks across the concrete walls. Not scratches, gouges, like something incredibly powerful had dragged its hands across the solid cement. Nearby sat stacks of research folders. Most have rotted into unreadable mush. One page remained intact. Across the top were 4 words. "Do not release subject." No explanation, nothing else. Neither of us spoke after reading it. We should have left then. Instead, we kept exploring. We walked another 30 minutes before realizing something. Every hallway looked exactly the same. Concrete, rusted pipes, heavy blast doors, numbered intersections. We had absolutely no idea where the exit was anymore. Emma pulled out her phone. There was no signal. Mine was the same. I think we went too far. I know. Then, Emma's flashlight flickered. Again. And again. Then it died. Complete darkness swallowed half of the hallway. She smacked it against her hand. Nothing. You've got to be kidding me. We tried changing the batteries. Still nothing. So, we're sharing yours? I nodded. The beam suddenly felt very small. Everything beyond its edges disappeared into blackness. The silence returned, until we froze. The sound came from somewhere ahead, like metal hitting a concrete. Then, another. Closer. Emma whispered, "Did you hear that?" Yeah. It stopped. For nearly a minute, neither of us moved. Then, something scraped against the wall. A long, slow, grinding sound, like fingernails dragging across concrete. Every instinct screamed at us to run. Instead, we walked faster, trying to stay quiet, trying to convince ourselves it was falling debris. Then we heard breathing, not ours. It was deep and wet, somewhere in the darkness beyond the flashlight. Emma shined the light ahead. Nothing. She turned around behind us. Nothing. The breathing stopped. We started walking faster. Then jogging. Then a howl echoed through the tunnels. It wasn't like any animal I've ever heard. It sounded almost human. Almost. But twisted into something impossibly wrong. We ran. No discussion, no countdown, just pure panic. The bunker became a blur of identical corridors. Left, right, another hallway, another doorway. Our footsteps echoed wildly. Behind us, something slammed into a wall. Concrete cracked. It was chasing us. The impact got louder, closer. Whatever it was huge. Emma held the flashlight while we sprinted. The beam bounced violently, barely showing where we were going. Then we reached a split. Left and right. Everything happened in seconds. Emma turned right. I stumbled slightly. My momentum carried me left. I screamed her name. She shouted mine. Then the flashlight disappeared around the corner. Darkness swallowed me instantly. I stopped running, not because I wanted to, because I literally couldn't see anything. I pressed myself against the wall, covering my mouth. Then, the creature reached the intersection. I couldn't see it. I only heard it. Its footsteps were impossibly heavy. It paused. For one horrifying second, I thought it had chosen my hallway. Instead, it exploded after Emma. The sounds that followed still haunt me. Concrete shattered. Metal screamed. That horrible howl echoed over and over. But Emma kept running. I could hear her footsteps getting farther away. The flashlight beam flickered faintly around distant corners. Then, a crash. Another howl. More smashing. Then, silence. No scream. Nothing. Just nothing. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever. Eventually, I noticed something. A faint glow, far down from Emma's hallway, barely visible around a bend. I forced myself to move. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the corner, her flashlight was laying on the floor, still on. The lens was cracked. The strap had snapped around it. The hallway looked destroyed. Chunks of concrete covered the floor. Pipes hung from the ceiling. Fresh scrape marks scattered the walls. Something had hit them with unbelievable force. Emma. The word barely escaped my lips. I wanted to yell, to ask if she was alive, but every part of me knew. If that thing was still nearby, calling out would only bring it back. So I picked up the flashlight. My hands shook so badly the beam bounced across the walls. There was no blood, no body, nothing, just destruction. I walked farther. Every instinct told me to keep searching. Maybe she'd escape. Maybe she was hiding. Maybe... Then I heard footsteps. Slow and heavy. Not running anymore. Just walking. Somewhere ahead, deliberate, impatient, the beam caught the edge of the corner intersection. Beyond it, something moved. I only saw part of it, a pale gray arm disappearing behind the corner, far too long. Its fingers brushed against the floor as it walked. I stopped breathing. The footsteps continued, not searching, hunting, just wandering, waiting. I stood there for 2 minutes before continuing. Every part of me wanted to go after Emma. She would have come back for me. I knew she would have. But I also knew, if I had turned that corner, neither of us would leave. So I backed away, one slow step at a time, trying not to make a sound. Every step felt like betrayal. Eventually, I turned and began searching for an exit. The bunker seemed very larger now. Without Emma talking beside me, every hallway felt endless. Every shadow looked alive. At one point, I reached a staircase that ended in a collapsed ceiling. I had to crawl over broken concrete to continue. Another hallway flooded ankle deep with freezing water. The flashlight reflected off the surface, making it impossible to judge how deep it was. I moved as quietly as I could. Then my foot caught on a broken pipe. I fell hard. The flashlight flew from my hand and clattered across the floor. The sound echoed forever. My heart stopped. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. 30. But there was nothing. No footsteps. No howl. Only silence. I grabbed the flashlight and kept moving. Nearly an hour later, I noticed fresh air. A faint breeze. Then, a ladder. I climbed so fast my arms burned. When I shoved open the hatch, evening sunlight blinded me. I've never been happier to see trees. The police searched the area for 3 days. Search and rescue teams went inside. They mapped out a part of the bunker before declaring it structurally unsafe. Officially, Emma was listed as a missing person. They never found her, or any evidence explaining what happened. Years later, I still dream about that place, about the flashlight lying in the hallway, about the footsteps, about the choice I made. Sometimes I convince myself she was already gone. Other nights, I wonder if she was hiding somewhere in the tunnels waiting for me to come back, waiting for help that never came. I still have her flashlight. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. The cracked lens still works, sometimes late at night. I'll notice it sitting on the shelf where I left it. And every so often, without anyone touching it, the lights flicker on by itself. Just once, before going dark again. When my husband and I bought our first home, we were informed that there was an unfinished basement. That never bothered me. Well, until one night. My husband had been called into work unexpectedly and texted me he'd be probably home around after midnight. I was home alone with our golden retriever Murphy. Around 9 p.m., my phone suddenly screamed with an emergency alert. It wasn't a weather warning. It said an escaped convicted violent offender had been seen in our area and instructed residents to lock all their doors and windows immediately and call 911 if they saw anything suspicious. I checked every door and every window to make sure everything was locked. After that, I sat down on the couch and turned on the TV and tried to forget about it. My dog, though, had other ideas. About 15 minutes later, he stood up, ears stiff, staring toward the hallway. He started barking. Not his usual bark when squirrels ran across the yard. This was deeper. He wouldn't stop. "No, hush," I told him. But he ignored me. Instead, he slowly walked toward the basement door and planted himself right in front of it, growling, a slow, steady growl I'd never heard from him before. My stomach dropped. I walked over and stared at the basement door. It was closed. Nothing looked unusual. I was trying to convince myself that I was overreacting because of the alert. I slowly turned the doorknob and opened the door. Darkness. The basement light was off. I couldn't see much beyond the first few steps. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. Not a sound. Every instinct told me not to go downstairs. So I closed the door, picked up Murphy by his collar, and brought him back into the living room. Eventually, he settled down beside me. I almost convinced myself everything was fine. Until about 20 minutes later, I heard it. A long, slow creak. I muted the television. The sound came again. I turned toward the hallway. The basement door. It was slowly opening by itself, just a few inches, then a little farther. But no one came out. The hallway stayed dark. I didn't want to see what happened next. I knew there wasn't anybody else in the house. I grabbed Murphy by the collar and backed away quietly as I could and hurried upstairs. Once inside our bedroom, I locked the door and shoved my dresser against it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone while calling 911. "Hello? Yes, I think someone's in my house," I whispered. The dispatcher told me to stay exactly where I was. Then, I heard footsteps downstairs. Slow, deliberate, walking through my living room. Then, they stopped, right outside my bedroom. The doorknob moved. Again and again. Murphy erupted into furious barking. Whoever was outside the door didn't want to try to force it open. Instead, everything went silent. Those next few minutes felt longer than anything I've ever felt, followed by crashing and someone yelling, then handcuffs clicking. An officer knocked on my bedroom door and identified himself before telling me it was safe to come out. They found the escaped convict hiding behind my bedroom door, waiting for me to come out. He was gripping one of my own kitchen knives and waiting silently for me to leave the room. Investigators later determined he'd gotten in through an old basement window, whose latch didn't fully engage when I tried to lock it earlier. The emergency alert had probably saved my life by making me check the house and stay alert. The man was arrested without anyone being hurt and returned to prison. My husband came home after that. Neither of us slept that night. Within the week, we had security cameras installed, reinforced deadbolts on every exterior door, and replaced every basement window lock. Nothing like that has ever happened to us again. But even now, whenever I hear an emergency alert on my phone, I can't help but look toward the basement door. I was 10 years old when I got the flu so badly that my parents let me stay home from school. My dad had an emergency at work and my mom had to leave with him because we only had one car that day. Before they left, my mom tucked me into bed upstairs and said she'd be back as soon as she could. "Keep your phone next to you," she said, "and don't open the door for anyone." I nodded, half asleep. I never heard them leave. About an hour later, I woke up to the sound of a cabinet door opening downstairs. I smiled. I figured my parents had came home. I even called out, "Mom?" But there was no answer. Just another cabinet slamming shut. Then the silverware rattling. I got out of bed and slowly walked to the top of the stairs. From where I stood, I could see into part of the kitchen. A man I've never seen before was digging through our cupboards. He was filthy. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in months. His hair was matted, and he kept talking to himself while stuffing boxes of crackers and cans of soup into his old backpack. He'd stop every few seconds and whisper things I couldn't understand before laughing to himself. I stood there frozen. Then he suddenly stopped moving. Without turning around, he quietly said, "I know someone's there." My heart dropped. I backed away to the stairs slowly as I could. When I reached my bedroom, I shut the door and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I whispered to the operator that there was a stranger inside my home. She told me to stay hidden and not make a sound. Then, I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming up the stairs. They stopped right outside my bedroom. The doorknob turned. Once. They were trying to come in. I held my breath so hard my chest hurt. The operator kept whispering, "Stay quiet. The officers are almost there." The man stood outside my bedroom door, and then I heard him laugh. Just enough for me to hear it through the door. His footsteps slowly moved away, a few seconds later. The front door slammed shut. The house went completely silent. Then the police arrived. They searched every room, but the man was gone. But they found muddy footprints leading through the kitchen. The pantry had been emptied onto the floor, and food was missing. One officer asked my parents if they remembered to lock the front door. My mom looked at my dad. Neither of them answered right away. Finally, my dad quietly admitted that in the rush to leave, he had forgotten to lock it. The officers believed the man had simply wandered in to look for food. They searched the neighborhood for hours, but never found him. We installed new locks, security cameras, and an alarm system a few days later. Nothing like that ever happened to us again, though. I'm an adult now, but I still check the front door every night before I go to bed. When I was 22, I made extra money by babysitting for families in my neighborhood. One Friday night, a couple I babysat for several times asked me if I would watch their 6-year-old daughter while they went out for their anniversary. She was an easy kid. By 8, she'd brush her teeth, listen to a bedtime story, and then go to sleep. I figured it would be one of the easiest nights I've had. After cleaning the kitchen, I stepped out onto the patio overlooking their pool. It was a warm summer night, so I cracked open a beer and called my friend to pass the time. About 20 minutes later into our conversation, I heard the sliding door open behind me. It was Emma. She was crying. "There's a man in my room." I laughed a little at first, thinking she had a nightmare. "What did he look like?" "I don't know. He was standing by my closet." I walked upstairs with her anyways. I checked under her bed, behind the curtains, inside the closet, and nothing. The bedroom window was shut and locked. I smiled and told her I think she just had a bad dream. Within a few minutes, she calmed down enough and fell back to sleep. After that, I went back outside. About another 10 minutes later, I heard the patio door open again. Emma was standing there. This time she wasn't crying. She looked terrified. Her face had gone completely pale. He came back. I sighed, thinking she still was frightened from the nightmare. "Did you see him again?" She nodded. Something about the way that she said those 2 words made me uneasy. I followed her upstairs again. This time, before I even reached her bedroom, I noticed something was different. A cool breeze drifted into the hallway. The bedroom window was cracked open. I knew it hadn't been that way before. I had checked it myself. At that moment, every hair on my arm stood up. I slowly stepped inside. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I looked toward the window, but there was nothing. Under the bed, nothing. Then I noticed the closet door. The first time I checked it out, I'd left it wide open. Now it was only open a few inches. I slowly reached out and pulled it open. At first, I didn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted to the darkness. Someone was standing in the back corner of the closet, perfectly still. I could only see one eye, staring through the hanging clothes directly at me. Neither of us moved, for what felt like forever. Then the eye blinked. Without saying a word, I ran and grabbed Emma. The man suddenly lunged forward, shoving clothes aside and stepping out of the closet. I didn't wait to see what he looked like. I ran. Emma was crying into my shoulder as I carried her downstairs 2 steps at a time. Behind us, I heard the footsteps crossing the bedroom floor. I slammed the front door behind us and sprinted to the neighbor's house. They let us in immediately and called 911. Within minutes, police surrounded the home. They searched every room, but the intruder was gone. Near the living room, officers discovered one of the front windows hadn't been fully latched. They believed that the man had quietly forced it open after thinking nobody was home. The parents came home as soon as they got the call. Emma ran straight into her mother's arms. The detectives told us that we had done the right thing by leaving immediately instead of confronting whoever was hiding upstairs. Unfortunately, though, the man was never identified, and I never babysat at that house again. Years later, I can still picture that dark closet. Not because I remembered the man's face. I never really saw it. What I remember is realizing that Emma hadn't imagined anything. The first time she came downstairs, someone had really been standing in her room. I just didn't look in the right places. I was in 7th grade when this happened. Our school had a lockdown drill every couple months, so when the announcement first came over the intercom, nobody thought it was real. The principal's voice sounded calm. Teachers did the usual lockdown procedures immediately. My teacher sighed and said, "All right, everyone, you know the drill." We turned off the lights, covered the window, moved into the corner the furthest from the door. Some kids giggled. Someone whispered, "I bet it's another drill." Then we heard screaming. Real screaming. From somewhere down in the hallway. Every sound in our classroom stopped. A minute later, another announcement came from over the speakers. It wasn't the principal. It was a man's voice. "If anyone comes out of their classroom, I'm going to burn this whole school down." His voice was shaky and angry and loud enough that it echoed through every hallway. Someone in my class started crying. Our teacher slowly reached for her phone to quietly dial 911. She told us quietly not to make a sound. We could hear him walking outside our classroom. His footsteps were slow, almost casual. Every few seconds, he would bang on a classroom door or kick the lockers. Then he'd start yelling again, "I know you're in there." One of the younger students couldn't stop crying. Our teacher wrapped her arm around him and whispered that everything would be okay. Even though I could tell she didn't believe it herself, the footsteps stopped outside of our door. Silence. Then, the doorknob slowly turned. It rattled once, twice, but thankfully, it didn't open. He laughed. A deep, unsettling laugh that gave me chills. "You locked it." Metal scraped against the outside of the door. It sounded like he was dragging something across it. Then he yelled, "You're all trapped anyway." A few seconds later, we smelled something. Smoke. Very faint. Someone whispered, "Is he really trying to burn down the school?" Our teacher's face went completely pale. She quietly opened the emergency classroom kit and told us that if she said go, we were running out of the back of the emergency exit without stopping. I remember looking outside the windows, wondering if we would have to jump. Then, from shouting somewhere farther down the hallway, "Police, drop it!" The man screamed back. There was crashing, more yelling, then silence. It felt like forever before another voice came over the intercom. "This is the principal. The situation has been contained. Remain in your classrooms until the officers escort you out." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just sat there shaking. When officers finally opened our classroom door, several of them had their weapons drawn. They escorted us outside with our hands on each other's shoulders. There were police cars, ambulances, and firefighters surrounding the building. I saw another officer leading a disheveled man into handcuffs toward the police vehicle. He was still yelling that the school deserved to burn. Later, investigators told us that he had escaped earlier from an insane asylum, several counties away. He had wandered into the school, carrying containers of gasoline and fire-starting materials, making repeated threats to kill people and set fire to the building. Staff had acted quickly, locking classroom doors and calling 911 before he could reach students. Officers confronted him in the hallway and took him into custody before he was able to start a fire. The school was closed for the rest of that week. Counselors were brought in for students, teachers, and parents. Some students transferred to new schools because they couldn't bear walking through those hallways again. For months afterward, every time the intercom crackled to life, my heart would race. Even a routine announcement made the classroom go quiet. It's been years since that day. The man returned to the hospital, and the school installed stronger security doors, additional cameras, and new emergency procedures. My parents say that we were lucky, and they're right. No one in my class was physically hurt, but everyone in that building were traumatized, and that took a long time to heal from. I've never taken another shortcut. Not because I don't trust GPS, because I learned that the roads can disappear from a memory long before they disappear from a map. This happened in October of 2021. I was 29 and I worked as a sales representative for farming equipment. Most of my week was spent driving through small farming towns, meeting customers, and checking on equipment deliveries. One Friday, my last appointment ran late. By the time I got back on the highway, the sun had already disappeared, and the cold rain had settled over everything. My GPS chimed. Alternate route available, say 26 minutes. I accept without thinking. The shortcut led into a county road that I'd never heard of. For the first 10 miles, everything looked ordinary. Farmhouses, corn, mailboxes every few hundred yards. Then, the houses stopped. The road narrowed until there wasn't even a painted center anymore. The harvest corn left behind 1,000 stalks that looked like broken spears coming out of the earth. The wind pushed them back and forth, making dry rattling sounds against each other. It was strangely unsettling. When I saw the sign, Blackwood Farm Road, a familiar sign underneath read, Private Farm Access. My GPS insisted it was still the quickest route. I assumed it eventually reconnected to another county road. It didn't. About 5 minutes later, I rounded a bend and found an old farmhouse sitting alone in the middle of the 100 acres. Most of the windows were boarded. An old pickup truck sat in the barn while weeds grown all around it. Old farming equipment that were rusted over. The place looked abandoned. As I drove past, a porch light came on. I looked in the mirror. A man was standing on the porch. He hadn't been there a second earlier. He watched my truck disappear down the road. I kept driving. Another mile passed, then another. Finally, the road simply ended. Not a bridge, not a gate, just a massive harvest field. There was nowhere else to go. GPS calmly announced, "You have arrived." I laughed out loud. Very funny. I shifted into reverse. That's when I saw the headlights. They were parked across the road behind me. The pickup from the farmhouse. The truck wasn't moving. It simply blocked the road. I waited. Nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. The same man stepped out. He wore muddy work boots, overalls, and an old brown jacket. In one hand he carried a flashlight. In the other, a long hunting knife. He didn't run. He walked toward me at a slow, steady pace, like he knew there was nowhere else for me to go. My heart slammed against my ribs. I locked the doors. He kept walking. The beam of his flashlight swept across my windshield. Then he smiled. It wasn't a grin. It was the expression of someone who's had done this before. I threw my truck into reverse. The tires spun in the wet gravel. I backed away as fast as I could. His pickup truck was still blocking the road. I veered off into the edge of the harvest field. The truck bounced violently over the uneven ground, stalks scraping underneath the frame. I narrowly squeezed around the parked pickup truck. The man lunged towards my driver door, but missed by inches. I never stopped. For nearly 2 miles, I drove with one eye on the mirror. No headlights, no truck, just darkness. Then, I regained cell service. I immediately called 911. Within 15 minutes, county deputies met me at a gas station. I was shaking so badly I could barely explain what happened. The sheriff took my report seriously. When I mentioned Blackwood Farm Road, one deputy looked at me and quietly said, "That's the old Foster's property." The sheriff immediately organized a search. The property technically belonged to a farming family that had moved away years earlier. Only one distant relative still lived there. The man I described. The next morning, deputies executed a search warrant after finding probable cause based on my report and evidence at the scene. Fresh tire marks were from my truck across the edge of the field exactly where I described. Near the farmhouse, they found my broken passenger side window, which had been torn off by the fence post while I tried to escape. Inside one of the barns, investigators made a far more disturbing discovery. The building had been converted into a hidden workshop. Among the tools and equipment there was personal belongings belonging to a man who disappeared 8 months earlier trying to drive home. Further forensic evidence connected the property owner to the man's disappearance and death. My escape, and the evidence left behind by my truck, gave detectives enough probable cause that they needed to obtain the warrant that uncovered everything else. The suspect was arrested that afternoon while trying to attempt to leave the property. He was later convicted of murder, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple other felony offenses. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The county permanently banned the road a few months later. Concrete barriers were placed at its entrance. Every major company removed it from their routing systems. The abandoned farmhouse and barns were demolished the following spring. Today, if you drive past that intersection, you'll only see an empty field and brand new sign that reads, "No public access." Most people would never guess why it was there. But I know why. Because every October, when the cornfields have been harvested, and the nights start getting colder, I remember passing that house when the light porch turned on. And the man who smiled because he thought I had reached the end of the road. But he was wrong. I made it home. And because I did, he never had the chance to kill anyone else. When I was 19, I worked a closing shift at a local pizza place. Most nights were boring. Deliver the pizza, collect the money, and head back to the store. But our managers always told us one thing. If something feels wrong, leave. A pizza isn't worth your life. I never understood why he repeated that so often. Until my last delivery. It was almost 10:30 p.m. when the order came in. Large pepperoni, cash payment. The address was a narrow road surrounded by thick trees, about 15 minutes outside of town. I almost asked someone else to take it because it was so far out, but everyone else already had deliveries, so I went. The farther I drove, the fewer houses there were. Eventually, my GPS told me to turn on a gravel road that was barely wide enough for one car. The only house I seen looked abandoned. Peeling paint, overgrown grass, one porch light barely glowing. I almost turned around, but I knew my boss would be a little bit upset if I didn't try to deliver it. Then the porch light flickered twice, like someone had noticed me. I pulled over, I grabbed a pizza, and I walked up the steps. Before I could knock, the door slowly opened. A man stood in the darkness. I couldn't make out much of his face, just that he looked older and was smiling. "The pizza?" he asked quietly. I told him yes, and then I told him the total. He patted his pockets. "Darn, my wallet's inside." Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Just come in for a second, while I grab it." The moment the door opened, the smell hit me. It wasn't garbage. It wasn't spoiled food. It was a heavy, sickly odor I can't describe without feeling nauseous even now. I instinctively took a step backward, but he noticed. It would only be a second. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside the doorway. The house was almost completely dark. The only light came from an old television flickering in the other room. The man had disappeared down the hallway. "I'll be right back," he called. I stood there holding the pizza, feeling like an idiot. Then, I heard crying, very faint, like someone was trying to make a noise. I froze. A second later came a muffled thump. Then what sounded like someone whispering, "Help." Every instinct I had screamed at me something was terribly wrong. With the pizza still in my hand, I turned toward the door. That's when I heard footsteps. Running, the man routed the hallway corner much faster than before. Only now, he was holding a large kitchen knife. His smile was gone. His face looked completely different. He saw me reaching for the doorknob. Without saying a word, he charged. I yanked the door open and ran. The pizza box flew into the yard. I sprinted for my car as I heard him pounding down the porch steps behind me. I had hit the unlock button. I threw myself into the car and locked the door as quickly as I could. He was only a few feet away, knife still in hand. He ran up and stabbed my window. I threw my keys into the engine and started it. I pulled my vehicle in drive and slammed on the gas and sped out of there. I was shaking so badly I almost crashed. But I didn't stop until I got back to the pizza shop. My manager called 911 while I tried to explain what happened. Deputies arrived within minutes and rushed to the house. They expected to find the man, but he was no longer there. The house was empty. No sign of him. But they did find something so much worse. The next morning, detectives came back to ask me more questions. I asked what they'd found. One detective looked at the other before answering. We can't discuss the details. All that he would tell me was that the evidence that they found inside the house indicated multiple violent crimes have occurred there over a long period of time, and investigators were treating it as a major crime scene. He thanked me for leaving when I did. Then he said something I'll never forget. I'm just glad you trusted your instincts. The house was demolished months later after the investigation. The man, unfortunately, was never identified or arrested. I quit my delivery job the very next day. People ask if I miss it. I don't. People in Iron Creek didn't fear the forest. They feared what answered from it. Every child in town knew the rule: never whistle after sunset. If you whistled once, the forest might whistle back. If it copied your tune, you had already been chosen. I moved to Iron Creek in late October, after accepting a job as a forest ranger. The locals were friendly enough, but every conversation eventually found its way back to the woods. One old man looked me dead in the eyes and asked, "You whistle much?" I laughed. Sometimes. His smile disappeared. Don't. The first month was quiet, just endless miles of pine, frozen streams, and abandoned logging trails. Then the reports started coming in. Campers hearing someone pacing around their tents, hunters finding numerous bare footprint tracks in fresh snow, dogs refusing to leave the porch after sunset. Late that night, when I was checking the trails, the sun vanished behind the trees much faster than I expected. The forest became black. Not dark, black. My flashlight barely reached 20 feet. Then I heard it. Someone whistling. A slow melody, 3 notes, repeated over and over, maybe 50 yards away. "Hello?" I called. Silence. Then, the same whistle, closer this time. I smiled, probably another ranger messing with me, so I whistled the tune back. Immediately, the woods went silent. Every instinct told me I just made a terrible mistake. Something moved between the trees, not walking, sliding, like it was gliding just above the ground. Too tall to be a person, too thin to be a bear. I raised my flashlight. Nothing. My radio crackled. "Don't answer it. If it whistles, run." Then the transmission cut out. Then I heard footsteps. They matched my pace exactly. If I sped up, they sped up. If I stopped, they stopped. Always just behind me, never close enough to see. I finally reached the ranger station, just after midnight. I slammed the door, locked it, and pulled every blind shut. I told myself I was imagining things.
Stress. Isolation. The stories had gotten into my head. Then someone whistled outside the window. The exact tune I answered. I forced myself to peek through the blinds. Nothing. Only darkness. Then, a face slowly leaned around the corner of the building. It wasn't human. Its skin was stretched tightly across a skull that looked almost deer-like, but wrong. The eyes reflected pale white, its smile impossibly wide. It didn't blink. It simply stared. That's when all the lights went out. Every bulb in the station died at once. Emergency power failed. The only light came from my flashlight. Then I heard footsteps. Inside. Impossible. The doors were still locked. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. A long fingernail scratched across the wood. Slowly. Patiently. Then, 3 knocks. A voice spoke. My voice. Open up! I backed away until I hit the wall. The voice laughed. Except, it wasn't laughter anymore. It sounded like dozens of people laughing all together. Men, women, children, all at once. The scratching stopped. Silence. I waited nearly an hour before opening the office door. The hallway was empty. Every room stood exactly as I'd left it, except one. The break room. Someone had written on the fog window with a long claw. You answered. The next morning, other rangers found me sitting outside the station, with my back against the wall, staring at the tree line. I quit that same day. No amount of money was worth going back into those woods. Months passed. I moved hundreds of miles away. I never heard the whistle again. Until last week. I was taking my trash out just after sunset. As I reached the end of my driveway, 3 slow notes drifted from the woods behind my house. The same melody. The one I answered. I looked towards the trees. There was nothing there. From somewhere deep in the darkness, my own voice whistled back, exactly as I had on that October night. And something began walking toward me, slowly, patiently, like it had never stopped looking. Because some things don't hunt your body. They hunt the promise you made when you answered.